Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
My name is Lloyd and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Lloyd.
I mean a real alcoholic. Before I start, I need to introduce somebody to you. I came all the way to the West Coast from Western New York, and one of my daughters works over in Portland. And her and two of her sisters are going to be at 22 years of sobriety. Nadia at the end of May and her two sisters at the end of June. They'll have, all three of them will have 22 years of sobriety. My daughter Nadia. God had his hands full that month, I'll tell you that. Because the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, they say. Well, I want to tell you that when Rich called me last fall with an early invitation to come to and visit and share here, I asked them, I said, why me? And he says, I don't know, it just came to my mind. We were at the meeting and your name came to my mind and I submitted it. And because of that, I said, okay, I'll come there. If you would have told me, well, we got a tape, we got all these tapes together and we listened to a tape that you made at some conference 5 or 6 years ago, and because of the tape, we invited you here, I probably would have said, play the tape. Because that man that was there 5 or 6 years ago is gone. And if that doesn't happen to other speakers, I feel sorry for them. If they can't say that man that talked 5 years ago, his story has changed, his recovery has changed, and that story, that man is gone. But since he said it just came to him, I like that. I like that because of where I am in my sobriety today. Let me tell you where I am. This was a milestone for me. First I got to tell you, I'm married for the second time. Nadia's mom is in the spirit world, and I have a different wife, new mom, we call her. And she thinks she's my sponsor. And I was so happy with the Al-Anon session this afternoon because, I really believe this. We got sick together. Shouldn't we get well together? At the same place, at the same time, shouldn't we get well together? I think that's the way God wants it myself. Well, let me come back to my wife. My wife, she told me, she said, we were in Minnesota a couple of years back. 2 years back, we were living in Minnesota. And I had this sign right next to where I drink coffee every morning. The sign says, Dear Lloyd, I will not be needing your help today. Love, God. And I had that sign there for a reason, a very special reason for me. Well, I thought when we moved, I threw it away. And she must have taken it out of the trash. When we got back to New York and we set up our house again, there it was. And I says, where did that come from? She says, I found it where you threw it out, and I thought we should keep it up there for a while. But that's the truth. That's the truth. I like that, because for a while, I had a feeling I was pretty close to God. Close to being God. Or I was God. who else could do what I did and still stay alive, you know? Well, that sign reminds me of something that is very, very important to, I think, to every alcoholic who looks to those promises and realizes that God will do for us what we can't do for ourselves. I need to go back, though, for you to understand part of this, because I need to go back, and I'm gonna take my watch off, and I'm gonna give it to Dottie. I hope she can read it. I got to tell you, while I'm taking my watch off, when they picked me up, Dottie and Rich and Art picked me up. And we had Rich's new truck. And as they picked me up, they put me in the truck, and the truck was maybe not working right the way Rich thought it should. So he said, Dottie, would you mind going in the back and check? I think there's something wrong with my directional lights. So Dottie got out, and she went in the back of the truck there, and she was standing there, and Art flipped that light on. He said, are they working? And Dottie was standing there, and she says, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes.
It's an honest program.
I said, uh-oh, what did I get myself into this time? I told her I was going to tell a story about her. There's probably stories weirder than that one that I didn't even know about.
Yeah.
Well, this is the beginning of a little visit. I've got to go back to, I think it's the middle of the 1950s, I think. My wife tells me it is anyway, because she's the one that remembers more clear than I those last days of wine and roses. No roses, all wine, rather. Because I was at a place in my life where every dream I ever had in my life was happening, it was in place, it was just a matter of a year, and everything that everybody around me ever dreamt that would happen to me was going to happen to me. I found myself a junior year going back to Emporia, Kansas, to my final year, or my junior year, and being captain of the football team. That was when a linebacker could weigh 210. They can't do that anymore, you know. And we won a championship, and I had never drank. When I say that, I had tasted beer, I had tasted wine, I had tasted what alcohol was, but I never really drank enough to say I drank. I used to pretend that I drank. I probably acted like I drank, but I never really drank up to that time, not really. And then we won the football championship, and they said, Chief, I don't know why they call me that, but they says, Chief, we're going to celebrate, and you have to celebrate with us this time. And I said, yeah, we need to do that. I need to do that. But I had seen alcohol. I saw what it did to my brother when he came back from World War II. I saw what it done to a lot of the men in our community when they came back. They had changed because they were using alcohol more than I had ever seen in my life. And I was afraid of it. I didn't have any respect for it, but I was afraid of it. But that was a different thing. Now, a few years later, when we won this football championship, and I said, all right, I'm going to drink. I'll drink with you. And I knew what that meant, because we didn't, by law, there weren't designated drivers. But I became the designated driver for every time there'd be a party, I'd go there and I'd be the designated driver. I found it had a tremendous advantage, because by the time the parties would end, I was the only sober guy there. I'd take all the guys home first, and then I'll take the girls home. And that was lucky. That was good luck, you know. But this time I was going to drink. And I had a feeling I knew what was going to happen. And as the evening progressed, it wasn't long before I puked. And I didn't think that was too unusual. I mean, when you don't like something and your body rejects it, up it comes, right? Natural. But then, a little bit later, I kept drinking. Now, I didn't realize social drinkers don't do that, but I kept drinking. And then I started singing cowboy songs. And I knew something was wrong because here I was, I'm singing cowboy songs. And first of all, they're sad songs, They're all sad songs, cowboy songs are. And besides, I'm an Indian. I'm singing cowboy songs. And then somewhere in the night, I cried because there was an emptiness that came over me. Somewhere near the end of my drunkenness, there was an emptiness that came to me that I had never experienced before in my life. And I cried. And here was the fullback on a football team, and I started to cry. I felt it right here. I felt a weight. A new weight came onto me. And then I passed out. And I swore the next morning when I woke up, they couldn't take me up to the dormitory. They couldn't take me back to, so they put me in a basement where all the old mattresses are. And I woke up and I thought they had taken me to an asylum of some sort because I didn't know where I was. And it wasn't quite daylight when I woke up. And again, I cried. And finally, I got a hold of myself and I promised myself that I'll never do that again. And I had this rubber suit that I used to run in to keep my weight at 210, and I started running. And I remember people say, look at that's why Chief is the champion, because look at him. Played football last night. They won the champion. Here he is running right away again. I wasn't running because I was trying to stay in shape. I was running to try to get that demon out of me because I had swallowed a demon. And I knew it, and I felt it, and I could almost taste it. Never again, I said. And the team talked about it, though. I couldn't help right afterward. They said that was the first time they saw me use alcohol. And they says, when that guy drinks, he really drinks. And I thought, my God, I think that's the only thing they're going to remember me by is the time we went out and got drunk. And that's true. I see some of those guys that I played ball with then, and the first thing they talk about is that we remember you, Chief, the first time that you drank. They don't remember the scholarly work that I was able to do or playing football. They remembered the first time I got drunk. It's odd the way we are that way, but that's what we remember. Well, I swore off all the rest of the year. I didn't drink. I went back to New York, and then in the summertime, everybody that I was close to they were iron workers, and they're drinkers. I mean, not just drinkers, those guys drink. And I became a Friday night. First, it was a Friday night drinker in the bar. Then it became a Friday and a Saturday night drinker in the bar in one summer. Then it became a Friday night, Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon, Saturday night drinker in the bar. And I didn't know it. I just thought, well, everybody does this. I didn't drink every night after we worked, but I said everybody does this. I was wrong. I went back to Emporia in late August, and I couldn't stop drinking. I practiced for 2 weeks. I made a good weight, and we had an inter-squad game before school opened. And after the game, I felt a little sore, so I thought, I know how to make myself feel better. I know how to make these aches and pains go away. So I wandered off from the crew, and I went across the little town that we were in, and I went into a saloon there. And the guy said, what are you doing here, Chief? Didn't you just practice? Aren't you playing football this year? And I said, yeah, but one beer won't hurt me. He said, yeah, right, one beer won't hurt you, Chief. So he set it up there. Well, in Kansas, the saloons close at midnight. And by the time I got to midnight, I had been drinking continuously from about 8 o'clock. And I had enough money to buy 6 quarts of Pabst Blue Ribbon. Quarts. All by myself, I picked up those 6 quarts. Everyone who bid me farewell, I went out and I went down to the park. And I sat underneath the tree in the park. And I started to drink. those 6 quarts of beer, all by myself. The party was over. The party was over before it even started, really. But the party was over. There was no social drinking. There was no fun. It was just a matter of how quickly can I swallow all that beer. Somewhere during the night, I puked, and I sang, and I cried. And the party was over. Within 2 months, I left school in my senior year. 2 months into right in the middle of the football season, I left. Couldn't stop drinking. And even though I would find the rationale to drink, I knew that I had lost control of something because I couldn't stop. After every game, I'd work out all week, and after the game, I would drink. And in late October of the football season, I left school. Now, for the next couple of years, I don't remember them too much because as soon as I left school, or a month after I left school, I joined the Marine Corps. And I remember going to North Carolina and going to Parris Island. And I says, Lloyd, you screwed up royally twice in 1 month. You're leaving school and now you join the Marine Corps. Now there's something really, really wrong with you. And I didn't, when I was in the Marine Corps, they thought I was a good Marine. They really did. Some of us that they put in this battalion of reconnaissance people, we went to jump school up at Fort Bragg, and they thought I was brave. Because whenever they volunteer, who's going to go first? I'd volunteer. I'll go first. Even if the plane, I didn't care how high the plane was, they thought I was extremely brave. I was drunk. And they'd say, that chief, he can do anything. And I said, yeah, chief, I can do anything, you know. But I had my first blackout when I was in the Marine Corps. I got out of the Marine Corps, then I went back up to Syracuse. And by that time, I was a full-fledged drinking alcoholic. I mean, I think I was the very first time I drank because I didn't take a social drink that first night. I didn't drink it the way I don't even know how social drinkers drink because I never hung around with them. I just took it and I drank, and I'd look for the people that drank the way I did too. I came out of there and boy, my life was chaotic. I mean, my behavior became bizarre. And bizarre doesn't even describe it, but people would tell me, Lloyd, your drinking is different. And it wouldn't even bother me. I'd laugh, and I said, that's right. And then somebody suggested, well, maybe you have a problem with alcohol. I said, I do have a problem with alcohol. I can't get enough. And my life was just as everything you can imagine. I'm going to tell you one incident, though, during those 8 years that I was drinking. I was in Chicago, and there's a bar, or there used to be a bar in Chicago. It was called a B-17. Now, if you know what a B-17 is, it's a bomber. It's a bomber in World War II, but they named this bar a B-17. It was an Indian bar. No Irish allowed. And I was sitting in a B-17 one Friday night, and I was in my glory because it was one of those bars where they didn't care if you drank wine and beer at the same time. The only problem with that place is the bathroom was bad. I mean, when I'd go to the bathroom, I'd take 8 deep breaths, and then I'd run in there and hope I could get everything done before I had to breathe again, and I'd come back out. Well, the next morning, I had stayed there, and in Chicago, they stayed open most of the night, and I was still in the B-17. It's 10 o'clock in the morning. And this young lady next to me, this 65-year-old young lady was sitting next to me. And I was doing pretty good, And all of a sudden, next to me on this side was this little old man, sat there, little Indian guy sat down next to me. I looked at him and I says, what is your name? He didn't say anything, so I looked back at this young lady I was with, And I heard him sing a song. And it was one of our sacred songs from back home. It was called A Creator's Song, and he was singing it. And I turned to him and I says, Mister, you know, you shouldn't sing that song here in the B-17. That song should not be sung here because it's one of our sacred songs. And I turned back because I thought he would take my warning, and it was a warning. And again, he starts singing the song. So I turned back at him and I said, I'm only going to ask you one more time, old man. Don't sing that song in this bar. And I turned back and I heard the song again. And this time I turned really quick, but he was gone. Yet I heard that song. It bothered me because I thought, now, I asked her, did you see that little guy sitting next to me? And she says, yes. Did you hear him singing? Yes. He's gone. Well, that scared me. It really did. It scared me because I thought, well, my drinking has brought me to the place where I heard that some people, if they drank too much, they would hallucinate. And it bothered me because I stood up and I went out of the bar and I went home. I told my dad what happened. And he just said, well, that's where you're supposed to be right now. Those things happen to people that do the things or live the way you've been living since you came out of the service. And that bothered me because I wasn't sure whether that little man was real or whether he was a spirit that brought a message to me, something has to change. And that stayed with me till right this moment. It's still here. I remember that incident. Because from that point on, my drinking got worse. Then up to July 19th, 1965. By that time, I had finished school, and I taught biology and physics at the high school. But I was an active alcoholic. Every Friday, we tested because I would anticipate the drinking I was going to do that night. I might add up, before that time, I met this beautiful Comanche lady, and I asked her to marry me. And she said no. And so I borrowed that night $23 from her. And then the next morning, she says, do you remember you borrowed $23 from me last night and you promised you'd get it back to me today? And I says, well, why don't we just get married? And she says, yeah, why not? I said, will we be even if I do that? And she says, will I still owe you $23? And she says, no. So we got married. For the wrong reason, that's not good reasoning. When you do it for that reason, something's wrong. I mean, something's wrong with when you do it like that. Well, we got married and we had, yeah, it just happens that way. But we went on and first came Paula Jean, and then Najee, then Lloyd Jr., and then Patty Mai. And I was drinking. I was a drunken school teacher. And on Friday night, the only way that she had a shot at any money at all was to be at the school when school let out. And then she could get some of the pay. It was bad. I have no idea what she ever did in her life to deserve me at that time. And I say that because I really did wonder. I said, she must have done something really bad in her life because she got me. I mean, the chances, there's 300,000 Indian people in this country, and she got me. And she used to tell me that. I'd come home drunk, or drinking after, and she'd say, 300,000 Indians in the country, and I got you. And she'd go on like that, And it used to bother me because I was sensitive about those things. And then she'd say, and you're an alcoholic. And then it was a different matter. When she'd call me an alcoholic, I'd say, now, wait a minute. You can call me anything you want to call me, but don't call me an alcoholic. Denial, right from the very beginning. Time went on. I'm going to come up to July 19th, 1965. I wake up in the morning and I'm in an alley behind a place called the Hobnob in Syracuse on West Street. The Hobnob wasn't a hobnob. It was a bar, an Indian bar where Indians, Onondagas, and Mohawk drank together most of the time. And I had stumbled out the back door, and I didn't make it very far. There was a cyclone fence there. I made it as far as the fence, and then I fell. And I stayed there. I didn't pass out, and I wasn't asleep. You couldn't sleep when it's like that. Well, as it began to get morning, I had curled into a prenatal position. And I'll never forget, and I hope I never forget this, the loneliness and despair that I felt when it was starting to get daylight. I curled up. I prayed that the Creator would take me, relieve me of this tragic life that I came to. Well, it wasn't long. My colleagues came down. They helped me to get up. I went to the corner of West and Gifford Street, and I began to panhandle. And you know, it's difficult for a 30-year-old man who is 240 pounds now to panhandle. I knew the little old ladies, though. I had a good, what I thought was a good approach. I'd say, "Ma'am, I'm trying to get back to the reservation. And all I need is a quarter, and I can get on a bus and go back to the reservation." All these little old ladies, she'd dig in her little purse, you know, and she'd, "Here you are, young man. Good luck to you. God bless you." And she'd go on her way. Well, I was there the next morning, too, and she came by. She says, "I thought you were going back to the reservation yesterday." But that first morning when she gave me money, we went and I was the runner because I was the youngest. Go over to Paul Seymour's liquor store. I mean, he'd seen me coming, he knew me, and he would go to the cooler and get out some wine. Thunderbird, chilled. Now, Thunderbird, warm, nobody can drink that. Thunderbird, chilled, a few people could drink it. And we'd take that and we'd go back behind the bar there, behind a hobnob. We'd sit down and nobody would say a word. And we'd take that and start passing that bottle around. That was July 19th, 1965 that I did that with them. And eventually we moved into the bar. Nobody had any money, but we'd go into the bar. And the bartender knew us because we had been there for about 30 days, 5 of us. Go in there every Saturday morning or every day. And somewhere during that day, I'm not sure, I experienced that moment of truth. A moment of truth. And I stood in front of the mirror, I looked at myself, and there I was, that champion. And I knew I was going to die. I was going to die a drunken, dirty, alcoholic Onondaga. And they'd find me and they'd say, "Remember what happened to this champion? What happened to this champion?" But I said, that's what's going to happen. And I just stood there. And I didn't cry. I was beyond crying then. But I stood there and something happened. I know what it is. I pushed that wine, a glass of wine and a glass of beer away up in front of the bar. And I straightened up and I walked out of the hobnob. I experienced the touch of the Master's hand. Every one of you, including Al-Anon, you had to experience the touch of the Master's hand to get where we are today at this conference. I took credit for that for many years. But you know, I think all of us thought, I decided, I think I'll go to that conference over there at Tri-Cities. That isn't the way it worked, folks. You were prompted to come here. You were prompted to walk this red road, walk this good red road with us together. We didn't decide that. We pretend that we're intelligent enough to make that good decision. But we don't make those decisions anymore. We end up here wondering, what in the heck am I doing here with... Oh, no, I don't mean Dottie, but I was, what I mean by that is that I was just, you follow what I'm saying is that God brought us here. That's the way it is. I didn't walk away from West Street or the Hobnob. God carried me. He was carrying me that morning. I wasn't even walking, but I went back to the reservation. It took me 6 hours to walk it. If I would have walked straight, it would take me about 3 hours to walk it. But I wasn't walking straight. And that night I got to my mother's home, and my wife was up on a farm near maybe 10 miles from where I was. She didn't know. She didn't know. And I got back to my mother's house, and I spent the night there. The next day, my dad wouldn't go to work because I had an unusual habit of, when he was gone, everything of value he had belonged to me. I said, well, in time it's going to be mine anyway, so I might as well hawk it now, because... And so he stayed home. Now, listen to this. Somewhere in the afternoon, I think it was afternoon, the phone rang, and my mother said, it's for you. For me. I picked the phone up, and he says, well, my name is Eddie. I'm with the probation department, and your wife is here, and she's sworn out a warrant for your arrest. I said, she did what? Why would she do that? I said. And he says, well, this is the choice. He says, we're going to come and get you. She tells me you have a problem with alcohol, that you drink. I says, well, yeah, I drink a little bit. And he says, have you ever heard of Alcoholics Anonymous? And I says, oh, yes, I've heard of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's good for those people that go there, like guitar players and, stuff like that, It's good for those people that are, those Irish people, they need that bad, And he says, Lloyd, he said, would you consider going to a meeting? I said, no. He says, then you're choosing to go to jail. I said, I didn't say that. And he says, well, you have a choice today. Our special today is Lloyd, go to meeting, or Lloyd, go to jail. Now, I was wind up, but I wasn't that stupid, I wasn't stupid. I says, who said I wouldn't go to that meeting? And he says, I'll send a man after you. I said, no, I'll come to, where's the meeting? I'll come there. No, we'll come and get you, he said. So somewhere in the afternoon, I thought I escaped because he says, we'll see you, Lloyd. And I said, yeah, that's you think. And I hung up, and I looked at my dad. And he was laughing over there because he knew who that guy was, his name was Eddie. He was a probation officer, and he sent a man by the name of Louis Clark to me, an Irishman. I didn't like Irishmen because 98% of the police in Syracuse were Irish. And they were after me. Like a big posse, they were after me. It seems like every time I'd go to West Street, it's a good thing I could run. I could still run then, And every time a big fight would break out, the cops would all come and I'd run. They couldn't catch me. I'd run, and they it was frustrating to those police then. But they knew who I was. I didn't know that they knew who I was, but anyway, this Irishman come to pick me up. Brand new car. He had on didn't have on a white jacket like mine, but he had on a suit, tie. And I looked at him and I said, are you looking for me? And he says, you got to be the one, get in. And he smiled at me. Out of the corner of his mouth, he looked over and smiled, and I said, ah, damn, that guy knows. I didn't know what he knew, but I knew he knew. This guy knows. And he says, roll the window down. Remember, I had spent 30 days on West Street. And in the same clothes, maybe not the same shoes, because I had different shoes on, I think, when I came home. And he took me to a meeting. And honest to God, the people there took one look at me, and they welcomed me in, but no one sat at the table. I thought it was because they didn't like me. But I wouldn't sit at the table myself if I had a choice. But I didn't know what they said. They talked to me. And that night, Louis took me back home, and he said, Lloyd, I'm going to come and get you again tomorrow. I says, how many times do I have to go? And he says, well, it's a choice. From what I understand, you either go with me or you go to jail. What time are you going to pick me up? I said. He said, well, before I pick you up, take a bath. Well, there's a beautiful creek that runs through the Onondaga. It's called Hemlock Creek. So clothes and all, I walked through that creek and I laid down in that creek. He's told me to take a bath, so I just laid in that creek, and then I would get out and I'd let the sun dry me off. Then I'd get back in the creek, and I got back, and Louis came after me again. But I had bathed. I followed directions, and I normally don't do that. But it wasn't really a bath, but I was dry, and he let me in his car again and took me to another meeting. Well, night after night, this guy was persistent. And he'd find me even when I tried to hide. He'd find me. And I said, there's a conspiracy against me, because every place I go, that guy finds me. So everyone's telling him where I am. That wasn't the case. He just said, I can find you. I know what you do. I know where you're going to be. He took to me, and this is the truth. 2 weeks went by, and Louis took me to a meeting every night. He took me to a meeting. And I didn't even know at the end of 2 weeks that I wasn't drinking. I didn't know that. Because he said, tomorrow I have to go someplace, and you're going to have to go to a couple meetings on your own, Lloyd. But if you do what you've been doing, it's going to work. And I says, what is going to work? He says, you're going to stop drinking. And that wasn't in my mind. That wasn't what I was there for. I was there to stay out of jail. But I wasn't going to stop drinking, you know. As soon as I could get myself together, I was going to drink. Well, that night, I got back with Nadja's mom, too, and she let me back in the house to the couch. Kind of the couch. It was the couch out on the porch. But I was able to sleep there, and in the morning I told her, I says, when I got back, I says, I have to go to another meeting tomorrow, you know, and I go to 3 meetings and I have to pay dues. And she says, you have to pay dues? And I says, yeah. Every meeting I need to put $1 in that pot or they'll throw me out. So she gave me $3, and she says, I suppose you need the car. I need the car. And boy, I'll tell you, I could feel every fiber in my body saying, we want alcohol. We want alcohol. We want thunder. We want thunder. I took the $3, and I was shaking by then, and I got the car. As I left the reservation, I thought, I got $3, and as soon as I spend this $3, I'm going to sell the car. And she knew it. She knew what I was thinking. I'm going to sell this car, and then I'm going to go on my last, final binge. Well, something happened. It's like us coming here. I went past the first saloon because that guy had about 4 of my checks. I couldn't stop at that first saloon because that man was a fool, let me tell you. One check didn't even have my name on it. It had somebody else's name on it. But anyway, he wouldn't. I came to the next one, and God takes care of drunks and little children, because the first 4 saloons I came to off the reservation, they had shut me off. I couldn't drink in them. Well, I said, I might just go downtown. I know where they'll serve me. I'll go back over to the Hobnob. I missed a wrong street up to the clubhouse. I'm across from the AA clubhouse in Syracuse, shaking. This old Irishman came out, and they saw me out there. They were drinking coffee, and he came over to the car, and he looked in, and he says, Lloyd, have you drank? And I said, no. And he says, then you've won. And I remember thinking, man, if I am winning, I sure don't want to be losing if this is the way you feel when you're winning. I am sure. And he had to reach in and turn my car off. He turned the car off. Somewhere during that day, something happened. I mean, I didn't drink. And when we had the early morning meeting, I put $1 in that. Like I told my wife, I was going to put $1 in the pot. I says, I still got 2. That's still 2 quarts of thunder. And then the noon meeting came, and I put another $1 in there. And I thought I got 1 more meeting to go, or a quart of thunder. And I didn't drink. I didn't say I was an alcoholic yet, because I wasn't there yet. But I spent that day with every thought, every strength that I had, said, drink. This is your chance again to drink. I didn't drink. But I knew in time that I had nothing to do with that day when I didn't drink. I knew that I didn't have a thing to do with that, because left even halfway to myself, I would have been right back at it. I drove back kind of sad, because on the way back, I said, I'm going to hang around these people too long. And one of these days, I'm going to say I'm an alcoholic, because that's what they all do. And if I stay there too long, I'm going to say, my name is Lloyd and I'm an alcoholic. I didn't want to do that, because I thought that what my roommate at Emporia told me, he said, Lloyd, everybody knows Indians can't drink. I says, really? Everybody knows that. He says, everyone knows Indians can't drink. And he says, anyway, you have to drink for 7 years before you become an alcoholic. And he told me, I don't know why he told me that, but he said, you got to drink for 7 years. And I thought, well, let's see, I still got 5 years. I can't be an alcoholic now, so I'm not going to be going to meetings because I got to drink for 7 years. That's what Norman told me. And Norman's a doctor, you know, he's a doctor. He was working his doctorate when I met him. And I said, I can't be an alcoholic. And I kept going back and forth in my mind with this, you know, but I kept going to meetings. Louis come back after me again on Monday, the following time he came back, and he took me to meetings. Now, you got to listen to this part of it. He would say, Lloyd, identify. Don't compare, identify with what the speaker says, okay? And one time this guy's talking, and I'm looking at the wrong guy. The guy I was looking at wasn't talking. The guy that was talking was over here, and I was looking at this guy over here. And then he told me, he said, Lloyd, I don't want you to ever tell anybody that I'm your sponsor. And, you know, it bothered me. You know, it bothered me that he didn't want me to tell anybody that he was my sponsor. And I says, why not? He says, look at you. Look at you. And I says, well, why do you always smile when you look at me and you mumble words? I says, what do you say? Are you bad-mouthing me? And he says, no. All I'm saying is, but for the grace of God, there go I. I didn't like that. I still was, you know, we alcoholics, we're sensitive people. And it used to bother me when they would tell me any stew bum can stay sober for 1 day. And these meetings, they were talking at me a lot of the times, I thought anyway. And it bothered me because, but listen to this. I used to go to a Friday night meeting. It got near Christmas time, and these people from Florida would come up, and there was a man who ran that big race at the state fair, and his wife was a movie star. Her name was Helen Vale, and she was my type. I mean, she was about 70 years old, and she had beautiful gray hair with a tinge of blue. And she came up in front of that, and she was a speaker that Friday night. I wasn't the coffee maker yet, but she came up there, and she says, Helen's going to tell her story. Great. When I looked up there, I says, oh. Never saw anything like that on West Street. I said, she's a movie star, right? She started telling her story. Right in the middle of her story, she said, on the surface, when I was out there, I would describe myself as being a puker and a singer and a crier. And something changed in me because my mind didn't go to the west side then, because here was this beautiful lady saying, I'm a puker. And she's no puker. She couldn't be a puker, you know. And then she cried, or she sang. She didn't say cowboy song, but she says I sang. And I cried. And I listened to her. And I used to hear these guys saying, if you quack like a duck and if you walk like a duck, you must be a duck. And I said, what the hell has that got to do with my sobriety? I mean, quack like a duck, what do you mean? And then when I heard Helen Vale say that she was a puker and a singer and a crier, the words tumbled back into my head that said, if you quack like a duck and if you walk like a duck, you must be a duck. And whatever happened to me at that moment, I breathed a sigh of relief. And I said, I'm home. Boy, I could not wait. I got in my car after that meeting and I flew back to the res, and there was my beautiful wife sitting there, and I went in there and I says, guess what? I says, I'm an alcoholic. And in her very graceful Comanche way, she said, no shit. I didn't mind. I didn't mind that. I didn't take that as a shot. Because the next week, something changed in my life because I had given myself to Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't know why, but I did. But I was a shaker. At the clubhouse, they wouldn't give me a full cup of coffee because I was shaking so much. I'd spill it on myself, on the counter, on the floor. They wouldn't fill the cup up. And this little old Eileen that worked there, she had done her job. Boy, she had done some strange wine too, because she'd say, hello, Lloyd. Did you want some coffee today? And so, but I was a shaker. And so I asked my sponsor, well, I got 2 sponsors by then, because Louis said, I can't handle this guy by myself. I got to have some help with this guy because he is bananas. And I got a second sponsor. And my second sponsor, he was an Irishman. He was a railroad man, and he said, Lloyd, have you ever prayed? And I said, no. I mean, I did a long time ago, but I don't think God listens to my prayers. I don't think I have a chance. If that's what I have to do, if that's what I have to do, and if I'm dependent on that, it's not going to work because God's given up on me. And he says, geez, you know, for a guy that's a school teacher, you're awful stupid. And that's all he said. He says, why don't you try praying? I said, I'll show this guy, I'll pray. I'll show him, I'll pray. So I went home that night and went out in the back again. And it's dark. Nobody around to see me. And I didn't really know how to start this whole thing. So I said, hey, Chief. Chief, I said, you know, I'm doing pretty good. I haven't drank now for a couple of months. And I'm wondering if there's any outside chance I'd stop shaking. Because it's embarrassing. I'm only 30 years old and I shake. And so that's the best prayer I could make. And I thanked him for being there and I said, I know that you probably kind of pushed me aside, but I'm doing okay now, you know, or trying to. I went back in the house and my wife said, we want a cup of coffee? And I said, yeah, and I picked it up. And geez, my hand was shaking like that. I said, see that? I'm going to go back up to that place tomorrow and tell them that doesn't work. I'm going to tell my second sponsor that no use doing that because prayer isn't going to work. Somewhere during the next week, I went back to the open house, and Eileen says, hello, Lloyd. Would you like a cup of coffee? And I says, yes, I'd like a cup of coffee. She forgot. She filled it that full. I picked it up and I looked, and my hand was just like that. And I went. Then I realized I wasn't shaking. And I learned when you pray for something like that, and when you're hurting so much, your prayer becomes a beg. He loves us so much, regardless of what we've done, he'll give it to us. He loves us so much, and he's seen how much we've suffered, he'll give it to us. In his time and in his way, he delivered, and I stopped shaking. Then I became a believer. I became a believer in praying. I learned, though, that sometimes God says no. And sometimes I'm damn lucky he said no. I used to pray for this one woman, you know. I said, man, that woman, help me with that, God, you know. I do that. I really do that. I say, help me check that out, okay? Oh, some 25 years later, I saw her again. Ooh. Oh, man. I says, God sure knows what he's doing. Looky there. Oh, my God. I became a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And Louis Clark, there was a guy named Johnny Vaccari. He was from Connecticut or somewhere over in Massachusetts. He was a little Micmac guy. He was been sober for 10 years. And he kind of took me under his wing. And he says, Lloyd, you and I are the only two sober Indians in eastern New York from Syracuse. There's two guys that are in Buffalo that are sober, but you and I are the only ones here. And he says, they're going to ask you to speak. Say no. And I says, why? He says, you have nothing to say. He said, I've got 10 years, I can talk. You only got 2 months, you can't talk. And I didn't like that. I said, you Micmacs, go on back to New England, I said. But even at the meetings, this is the truth. This was in 1965. If you had less than 6 months, they wouldn't let you talk at the meetings. They wouldn't. Now, I didn't know that, and I'd go to meetings with when Louis would take me to the meetings, and there was one meeting on the west side, all Irish. And we'd sit in a circle, or a ring, and as it would go around, he'd be calling on people, and as it would get close to me, Louis would say, Lloyd passes. I'd look over at him, and they'd all chuckle, and he'd get by me, and I'll say, finally one night, and this guy who was chairing was my second sponsor. He was the Irish railroad man. And one night he told me, he says, Lloyd, he says, I know it's bothering you that we don't let you speak, but you don't have anything to say. What are you going to say? And he says, you don't have anything to say. And I said, I'm going to stay at that damn meeting, and I'm not going to drink until he asks me to speak. It was for the wrong reason. But I kept going back to that meeting, and I'd sit right in front of him, right next to the chair, And I'd sit there, and I'd wait, and every time they come around, Louis would pass for me. And one night, I don't know even how long I was going to the meeting, but he'd come around to me, and he says, Lloyd. I said, pass. I pass. I got conditioned. I'm passing it at that meeting because they wouldn't let me talk, so I passed. And everybody laughed because they knew it was beautiful, though. But, then we didn't have places to go, like rehabs. So my sponsor, Louis, would take me to Auburn Prison. I mean, wasn't sure whether he was a spy. They were going to lock me up finally, anyway. But we go across the yard, and all my cousins were there. I'd wave, hi, Don, hi, Beanie. So, look, Lloyd's here, like old family. Just all my cousins were there and going to jail. And Louis says, you can't say anything, though. You're just here. I'll talk. So Louis would talk to the prisoners, and they'd say, who's he? He says, no, he's just going to listen. And every time we'd leave there, though, and they'd shut those doors behind us, I'd get outside. And one day, I cried. I hadn't cried in a long, long while. But they shut the door behind me. And I remembered, if I had been caught at some of the things that I was doing, I could probably be there, locked up with those guys. I used to sell furniture that didn't belong to me. That's not funny. You were supposed to feel sorry for me at that time. But I used to go to this bar that had 3 floors of apartments, but nobody lived in them. But there were televisions, beds, couches, rugs in every one of the apartments. And once in a while, he let me sleep up there because I used to dance. I used to put the show on Friday night. Because when that rock and roll was playing, boy, I could get down, let me tell you. And I was showtime. They'd get me, and I'd get out there and dance by myself. But he let me stay up there. And finally, one day, he says, Lloyd, he said, would you help us move some of the televisions? And I said, no, I'll help you. So he had the guy, and geez, we start taking these televisions different places, and I shouldn't tell this story, huh? Anyway, we'd take these televisions. The next day I'd go back up to his apartment, there'd be a different televisions in there. Filled right back up. I caught on. I wasn't stupid because I knew, I says, these things are hot. This guy's got to, well, as would have it, it was that July when I came into the meetings, on July 19th. The end of August, 3 guys went to jail for peddling stolen property. And there I was in AA wondering if they got my name. But God was taking care of me because I didn't know it then, but he had something for me to do. I'm going to move beyond this because in my quest for sobriety, I was told someplace that when we began to drink, the first thing that went on us was our physical being. No, the first thing that left us was our spirit life. Spiritual life was the first thing that alcohol dissolved. And then intellectually we would go, and then eventually if we drank enough, we would die physically. And the way we come back is the reverse. The first thing we get back is our physical being, then our intelligence, and then the spirit life would come back to us again. Spiritual life would come back. And that used to not bother me, but I used to think that because the guys that I drank with, and I'm going to tell you a quick story, but I got to get on to this other part of it. One time when we were drinking, we were out behind a hobnob, and my cousin Art, we were broke. And we were sitting there, how are we going to drink today? And Art told the guys we were with, he says, well, you know, Lloyd is different. And he says, yeah, we know he's different, but how are we going to drink? He says, I think Lloyd can make himself invisible. And I looked around, and he says, Lloyd, you can, can't you? And I says, yeah, I make myself invisible. That's sanity. And I said, yeah, I can do that. He says, well, make yourself invisible and go into the bar and get a half a gallon of wine off the back bar if you can do that. Okay. So I have to take off my shirt. I had a shirt. I took my shirt off, and I shrugged my shoulder a little bit. I walked slowly into the bar. There was Slick reading his paper. I walked slowly. I turned. I went and I got a half a gallon of wine. I took it off the bar, real quiet. And I turned around and I looked at Slick. Didn't even hear me. Didn't even know I was there. I walked out the back door with half a gallon. Now, I really did think in my insanity that I was invisible. And when I got out there, they all did too, you know, because I come out with a half a gallon. And we sat there, kind of chuckled about it, and I shook it off so they could see me. And we drank. Years later, I asked Slick about that. He said, I heard you talking, Lloyd. I heard them telling you could become invisible, so I just went along with it. You know? I thought I was a spiritual kind of guy that really could do that, you know. If I had to try, though. It would take a lot of work to do that, but I could make us invisible. But anyway, the time went on, and let me tell you how my life is today, okay? I got to tell you this. I came in, God brought me to Alcoholics Anonymous in April 19th, 1965. 13 years later, I drank because I was crazy, you know? I mean, I couldn't understand the simplicity of not drinking a day at a time and praying to God and asking if this is one of those days when I will not have this mental defense against the first drink. I didn't know enough. I heard the words, but I couldn't do it because it was outside of me. And I had to drink 13 years later. But the reason I tell you that is because I learned something by drinking. I said, why did I drink? Why me? And a lady at a meeting heard me say, why me? And she says, why not you, Lloyd? There's nothing special about you. I didn't like that. But I bought it. You know, there's a lot of things we hear, we don't like it, but we buy it because we don't have a choice. It's kind of like, everything is like McDonald's. We know it's bad for us, but we swallow it anyway. Well, when this lady said, "Why not you? You're nothing special about you," I bought it. I didn't like it. But I began to realize something, that after I drank that time, if I'm going to stay sober this time, there's something that I missed during those first 13 years. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to go back and start right at step one again. I have to do that and work back up through and see what I missed, because I missed something because I drank. And I found a lot of excuses, but I know this, that the reason I drank was because I wanted to drink more than I wanted to stay sober. That's why I drank. And you can color that any way you want to, but the real reason I drank is because I wanted to drink more than I wanted to stay sober. Well, as it would have it, at the time I was at Penn State University studying when I drank after 13 years. And my daughter Nadia and her sister came to find me, and they called my girlfriend, or she wasn't really my girlfriend then, was she? Oh, she was. Grace, my wife. And she said, "We called Grace and she's coming down here to get you, so take you back up so you can." And I had drank for a day and a half. Through the grace of God, that was the last time that I had to drink. Because it taught me something about alcoholism. Sometimes some of us put the plug in a jug, like my first sponsoree, Bill C., never to drink again. Some of us, our disease still has something to teach us. And I saw it as such in time, that I drank that time not because I was trying to destroy myself, but because my disease still had something to teach me about humility, about humbleness. And so I had to drink again. Because Johnny was right. I began to speak. They'd call me to meetings, I'd speak, and first thing I was buying it that I did that. I did this, I did that, I, and it was gone. I drank. They stopped asking me to speak. And that didn't bother me. I just wanted to stay sober until I realized this, that some people have another chance. My chances were all used. And if I go out and drink again, I'm going to die. That's what I came to believe. That's what it had to teach me. And I had to do it in a humble way. All right, let me move beyond that now. My life kept getting better and better and better, and I remarried. And when I remarried, I had 4 kids, Nadia's brother and 2 sisters. And the woman I married, she had 3 kids, about the same age. When I married Grace, all of her friends said, "Grace, you must have brain damage, because you've got 3 kids, he's got 4, and he just drank." That's 7 teenagers you're going to put together in the same house. And all of them were smoking pot and drinking. But she says, I asked her that, I said, "Grace, why did you marry me then?" "Faith." She said, "I have faith. I watched you. Something told me that you had done your thing, and it was going to be different this time." Faith in me. And I had just drank. Our life continued. Our family got together, and 3 of our daughters are coming up on 22 years. 2 of our sons are sober in the program now. The only one of the older ones still does things wild, but that's okay. You know, I learned this about children. Listen carefully. Our children that we have came here through us, not from us. Once they were born, even as small children, they then belonged to God. God had a plan for Nadia. I didn't know it at the time. He had a beautiful plan for Nadia and for the 3 sisters and for even the one. I'm sure that he has a plan for the oldest one, Paula. I'm not sure what that is, but I got to stay out of it because they came through me, not from me. And God has a plan for them. I believe this, the first time we go to a meeting and we walk in there and we're not drinking, there's an agreement made between us and God. We don't even know it. God says, "You get yourself to that meeting, not drinking, and I'll take care of the rest." Can you imagine that? that all you have to do, and I didn't know, I wish they would have told me this. All you have to do is not drink and go to the meetings, and God will take care of the rest. He guarantees it. You have to change a little bit, but God will still take care of the rest in His time and His way. You have to get yourself open. You have to open your heart. I know that's the way it works. It worked for me. Now, let's move on. This spiritual thing, and I have to talk about this, and you're going to have to stay with me this time, because I'm going to say some things that some of you are going to say, man, where did Rich find this guy? Let me start it clearly. Don't go yet. I'm going to say something pretty good right now. I've come to understand this. For years, I thought that I was a human being that periodically had a spiritual experience, only to find that the essence of me and you is that we're spirit beings having a human experience. The only thing that's lasting about us is our spirit. Because when we spend the days that we're assigned to be here, our spirit goes home. Our body goes back to the ground. And so the only thing, our true essence is spirit. And so that makes us spirit beings. Now I'm going to tell you how I learned that. A few years back, I was asked if I would go up on this butte in North Dakota and sit up there for 4 days and 4 nights and pray and fast, praying, crying for a vision so I could understand where I was going or what my life was to be. So they put me up on this butte. I'll only tell you one part of it that came to me while I was up there. I had made my 9th step, 8th step list. And on the bottom of that list, I put my first wife, the bottom of the list. And then during my non-drinking time, I had to add different names to that, because there were occasions when I did things that hurt other people, or I didn't do things that I should have done that hurt other people. Grace calls those my sins of omission. I don't know where she heard that, but she says those sins of omission are as powerful working against you as the things that you do. But I had her list, my wife's list, at the bottom of that list. I was up on the hill. And I was looking for a spiritual experience so I could move on in my life to grow to full stature spiritually, whatever that means. I'm laying there the last night in desperation. And I have a buffalo robe over me. And I pick it up to look over to the east to see if it's getting daylight, because she's going to come after us, or it'll come after us on that 4th morning. I looked up to see there was light coming up, no light. And I heard his voice say, "Not time yet." And I put it down. I said, "Uh-oh." Here we go again. Didn't even have any Thunderbird. I said, and I'm hearing this, So I pick it back up, put it over my shoulder, and I look back. And sitting on my hip was this little man. He was about that tall. He had on a funny hat. And I asked him, I says, "Who are you?" He says, "You can call me Kola." And that means your friend. Kola, my friend. And I said, "Why are you here?" He says, "Because I've always been with you in recent years. I've come to help you." And I says, "Are you Asian?" Because he had this funny hat on. And he had eyes kind of like mine. I says, "Are you Asian?" He says, "No, there are no Asians here." He says, "There are also no Onondagas where I'm from. No Irish, no Germans. We're spirit." And I said, "Oh." We had a conversation, and he said, you've left something out of your list. You can't move forward until you take care of that last amend that you left unattended to. There's one thing that you have to do in this program that we sent to the people. You have to take care of that last amend. You can't move forward until you take care of that commitment. And I says, I'll do it. It made me cry. But he helped me make it through that night, and when I got back, I told my wife, Grace, I says, I have to make an amend to Isa, my first wife, because I can't do anything until that happened, until I do that. So I called her, knowing that I could be taken one shot. But I knew that all I had to do was take care of my half of that amend. And when she got on the phone, I said, I'm calling you because I need to do something. And will you please just listen to me, and then I'll listen to anything that you want to say to me. And I talked about an amend, how sorry I was for the way that I treated her. I was sorry for the way that I didn't take care of her the way I should have when we were together. I said, I'm apologizing. If I could make it right now, I would do this. I'm making it as right as I can. And I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm just telling you that I'm sorry. I'm making an amend to you. Much to my surprise, she didn't come back at me with any anger. Instead, she says, well, Lloyd, you shouldn't blame yourself, because all the time you were doing those things, I knew what you were doing, and I didn't say anything to you. So I'm as much at fault for what happened as you are. I couldn't believe it. But I came off and I realized this is the way the program works. Because if you make a commitment to a thing like to make amends and you put them on your list, God knows what you've committed to. And if you leave it off and not take care of it, it blocks you from going further in your spiritual development, because you've kind of locked yourself into that. You have to take care of that, and then you can move on. Because I came off from that hill, and things from that time to this time, spiritually in my life, have come to me like I can't even begin to explain to you what it is. But I know today, for true, I know, number one, that I am here alive today because of the unconditional love that God has for everybody, in particular the alcoholic. And I know all I have to do to make it better is to pray. I have to remember to read page 30 of the big book, because I have a tremendous tenacity to hang on to ego. I have to look at page 30 of the big book that says, this is what the abnormal drinker thinks. Somehow, someday, I'm going to drink safely. I have to do battle with that. I have to remember where I came from. I have to know that there will be those days when I will not have the mental defense against the first drink. And I have to pray in the morning, every morning, and I do this. If this is one of those days when I will not have the mental defense against the first drink, and probably no other human power will be able to provide me with that defense, I must rely on a power greater than myself. And I heard a young man say when I was talking one time, there are no musts in AA, Lloyd. I says, maybe not for you, but there's musts for me. And it's all the only way to put it is that a must. That's a must that I must do, because I know what I am. So with that, by doing that, by experiencing all of those things, I've come to understand that I am a spiritual being. That's why it works for all of us. Did you ever think about, why does it work for all of us? Why does this one set of practices work for every one of us? Because the true commonness that we have, all of us, is our spirit. The spirit that my brother Rich has comes from the same place where the spirit that I have comes from. It comes from the same place. And when the number of days that we have are taken and are done, it goes back to the same place, And that makes us, it's common. That's why the commonness of our program, that's where it lies, in our spirit, that we're spirit beings having a human experience. Then one step beyond that, if that's truth, then this must be the truth also. That while we're on this journey, all we need to do is ask. All we need to do is ask to stop shaking. To stop being self-centered. The last thing I'm going to talk about. At this ceremony that I go to 12 years ago, and listen to what I say, don't try to identify with what I did. I allowed them in this sacred circle to put 2 pegs in my chest. And it tethered me to this tree. And I says, I can't do this. And they said, yes, you can. And they said, dance up to that tree. And the 4th time you dance up the tree and back up. The man said, now when you go back this time, Lloyd, pull away from the tree. I said, I can't. And my mentor said, Lloyd, look up at the tree, the sacred tree, and don't pray for yourself as you go backward. And I began to pray for the children of the world because of what they're going to inherit. I start backing away from that tree, and I never knew when I hit the end of that rope. I saw those sticks fly out, but there was no pain. I never knew when it happened. My dad always said, I hope you do something significant or be significant. You know, the odd thing about that, it was in my life the moment that I became insignificant was the moment that I became significant. And I learned all of it in Alcoholics Anonymous. I have a PhD, you know. They never taught me that at Penn State University. That PhD, it means something, but it means nothing in the spirit world. It doesn't make me any better or any worse than anybody else. It's a void. What does matter when I can maintain myself as being insignificant and put other people in front of me. And that's what I live for today. That's what I know why I came here, my instructions when I came here. My spirit, first of all, wanted to be an alcoholic Onondaga, to experience that. And it was going to happen regardless of what I did. So my spirit could experience what it was like to be an alcoholic and then have victory in this life over that through Alcoholics Anonymous. So when we say that this program is a spiritual program, some people say the spiritual side of it. There is no spiritual side of it. The entire program is a program of spiritual recovery. It has nothing to do with anything other than that. I've learned to love myself before I could love other people. I learned to trust myself before I can trust other people. The whole thing's an inside job. And it's inside to say, God, help me now. God, help me now. I'm done.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, Powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside. Then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down. And then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.